Welcome to Dewey and the Anonymous Source as presented and created by Kyle Sullender. This brief presentation will explore the ethical and practical responsibilities of journalists who use information provided by or attributed to anonymous sources. Let's begin by quickly evolving our understanding of what an anonymous source really is, because an anonymous source can refer to two different types of individuals. First is the source which gives information either face-to-face, via the phone, or via email, but whose name and identity the reporter is aware of while the reader is not. This source may request that their name be kept out of the report and kept between they and the reporter in order to protect their identity. The second type is the anonymous tipster. In this case, neither the public nor the reporter will know the identity of the person providing the information. In these circumstances, reporters must express extreme caution regarding whether or not to trust the source's information. Anonymous sources such as these most often appear in reports about crime, political plans or scandals, and judicial hearings. Some anonymous sources even go on to claim the fame of the report itself, much like Deep Throat, who we now know is Mark Felt, did after his involvement in breaking the Watergate scandal. It is not uncommon for a source to request or require that their name be excluded from publication in exchange for the intelligence they plan to reveal. As a result, journalists must constantly decide whether a story is important enough to worry about protecting someone's identity. You may be thinking that the trade made with anonymous sources seems fair, wondering in what way this creates an ethical dilemma. But the anonymous source carries some negative connotations and can require quite a bit of lying and tactical information withholding in the future. Sometimes doing so can result in lawsuits and trials, accusations from the government, as we'll explore in a minute, and even lead to possible jail sentences. It is worth ethical inquiry considering the source of information will not be held responsible for the fallout of the story, whether the information is false, slanderous, or appears in any other scandalous degree. It is for reasons such as these that some corporations, such as USA Today, deter their employees from implementing the use of anonymous sources to maintain the credibility of the network. USA Today writes it quite plainly in their employee guidelines. The use of unnamed sources erodes our credibility and should be avoided. When there is no other way to obtain information that is crucial to the reader's understanding of the story, and they go on to explain alternative methods of obtaining information. So how often do anonymous sources really cause problems for journalists? Is this an issue within modern journalism that deserves our attention? To answer this question, I divert your attention first to three recent incidents involving anonymous sources. The first of which is the story of FoxNews.com reporter Jana Winter. Following the movie theater shooting in Aurora, Colorado in 2012, Winter published an article online referring to a notebook that gunman James Holmes sent to a psychiatrist before his attack. The notebook contained details about how Holmes was going to murder people and was accompanied by his own illustrations of stick figures shooting other stick figures. Winter's source of this information, described as only a law enforcement source, was unnamed in the article. Holmes subpoenaed Winter to reveal the identity of her sources. Winter refused, and Holmes's attorney then won two small court rulings where Winter faced possible jail time for being in contempt of court. But Winter took her case to the New York Court of Appeals in 2013, where they ruled in her favor, saying that she was not required to name her sources. Holmes's attorney tried to appeal that decision by taking it to the Supreme Court, but they refused to take the case. Next, watch this brief news report about a local kidnap and murder spree which was informed by an anonymous tipster. This simple clip explains far better than I can the ethical dilemmas and professional dilemmas involved with listening to an anonymous source.
County child killer. His information is behind a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, and tonight we're hearing recordings of him for the first time. But his voice is not new to 7 Action News investigator Heather Catallo, is it, Heather?
No, it's not. Now that I've heard this recording, I know for sure this is the same man who was contacting me about this case for several weeks back in 2010. We never used his information in the story because he never provided us with any proof or any way to verify who he is or what his motivations are. 7 Action News was the first to report that a recent $100 million lawsuit filed on behalf of one of the families of an Oakland County child killer victim was relying on information from an anonymous source. Between 1976 and 1977, 4 children were abducted and murdered along the Woodward corridor. The source uses the alias Bob. Both the Detroit attorney who filed the lawsuit, Paul Hughes, and Christine Mihelich's mother, Deborah Jarvis, admit they have never met Bob and they don't know his real name.
The number of victims is tied to whatever they are trying to accomplish.
This is a recording of a conference call meeting that Bob conducted over the phone with Chief Assistant Oakland County Prosecutor Paul Walton, Oakland County Undersheriff Mike McCabe, former Detroit Police Chief Ike McKinnon, and an Associated Press reporter in October of 2010. During that same time period, Bob was also contacting me. He said he could prove that there were more than just 4 victims of the child killer, and Bob wrote up this detailed memo alleging that the victims were abducted and their bodies were discovered on dates that were connected to pagan holidays. This is Bob giving his reasons of why Mark Stebbins was taken by the killer on February 15, 1976.
February 1st, or the first full moon in Aquarius, is a time of cleansing and newborn lambs. The first full moon in that month was February 15th.
Bob claims the killings were tied to satanic cult activity in Metro Detroit.
Whoever did this likely hides behind religion and may very well be delusional, either or both auditory or visual.
The problem was, Bob would never provide a name or any information about himself or a phone number so that we could verify what he was saying.
If he was some crazy dude, he'd just be out there posting it all over, or he would be turning the matter over to the Oakland County prosecutor. He wanted one piece of information, essentially, to confirm what he basically already knew before he was going to put an individual out there as a suspect. And that, my friends, is integrity on his part. That's all he wanted to verify was before he put that information forward.
Are you sure we haven't posted anything on the internet?
Hopefully that video displayed some of the difficulties involved with deciding whether or not to use an anonymous tipster. Finally, let us move to the story of James Rison, a New York Times reporter who wrote the book State of War. However, within the book, Rison quoted an anonymous source about a secret U.S. operation that would damage nuclear facilities in Iran. The government demanded that Rison name his source, believing that it was former CIA officer Jeffrey Sterling. They believed they had the right to know if Sterling had offered the information or not, because if he had, he would have been in violation of the Espionage Act. The Espionage Act is essentially legal speak for don't tell anyone my secret on behalf of the U.S. government, but I will cite the specific passage in question at the conclusion of this presentation. Rison refused to name his source and had his decision reinforced by the district court. However, 2 years later, the appeals court said that being a journalist was not enough to allow him protection from the law and deemed it necessary for him to unveil his sources. Just this year, the Supreme Court, like it did in the Jana Winter case, refused to take Rison's appeal. As of now, he will be forced to reveal his source or spend time in prison for refusing to do so. So clearly it's been presented that the use of anonymous sources is a current and difficult problem present in today's media. But these cases pertain mostly to what happens after using an anonymous source. So that begs the question, should you use them at all? Anonymous sources do not face the same repercussions that normal sources would for what they say, so they can pretty much say anything without having to worry. As a reader, seeing something attributed to an anonymous source means that you have to struggle with the idea of whether or not the information is reliable, which puts you at an incredible disadvantage when dealing with the story. So finally, we come to the decision, which is it fair to put readers at this disadvantage? We're going to turn to John Dewey for the answer, but first a quick biography on the philosopher. John Dewey was born after the death of what would have been his older brother, John. He was named after him, but given a different surname because his father couldn't bear to use his own name again for another child. Many believe that Dewey's parents had John to replace his deceased brother. Dewey taught primary school before switching roles and taking a job at the University of Michigan in 1884. In the next decade, John became a classical pragmatist and focused on the philosophy around this belief. Pragmatism, in short, being the idea that seeing is believing. Dewey headed to the University of Chicago in 1894, where he dealt with everything from philosophy to journalism to education. Dewey published The Public and Its Problems in 1927, a book filled with insight on journalism, politics, and societal communication. Dewey's philosophy around journalism and life was one of an anti-elitist, meaning he believed in a society which was driven by an informed public and not by an unfair official. For this reason, he believed the media's main purpose was to be informative as well as educational. It is because of this that one should believe Dewey would absolutely deny the merit of the anonymous source. Now, Dewey never addresses this issue directly. That would make my job too easy. But he does leave behind a trail of reasoning that should lead one to the conclusion that anonymous sources do little good. As noted, Dewey was an anti-elitist, but that doesn't just relate to those in charge. That means no one should have a seat above another. Of course, that's exactly what we've pointed out the anonymous label does. It removes the harm from one individual that another source may have to endure, because they're not liable for what they say. That's not fair. Dewey would certainly find it to be unfair. Secondly, the media's job is to inform and educate the public in the mind of Dewey. But as we asked before, can you trust anything attributed to an anonymous source? Well, as a pragmatist, Dewey would most likely say no. Pragmatism, as noted, means that you only believe what you can confirm. Theoretically, I could confirm the information from a normal source by asking them myself. I know who they are. I could easily call them and ask them. However, in this case, I do not have that ability. There's nothing I can do to empirically confirm this testimony, and so I should not believe it. It puts the public at a disadvantage. This would be Dewey's biggest problem. In an effort to expose a story, you are really showing the public that they cannot trust what is being written. Dewey's philosophy on communication is best summarized by this quote from The Public and Its Problems. We have the physical tools of communication as never before. The thoughts and aspirations congruous with them are not communicated and hence are not common. Without such communication, the public will remain shadowy and formless, seeking spasmodically for itself, but seizing and holding its shadow rather than its substance. Till the great society is converted into a great community, the public will remain in eclipse. Dewey would absolutely not have been in favor of the anonymous source because of the disadvantage it puts the public in and because of the advantage it allows to that source in comparison to the source who puts his name with his information. Thank you for your time and watching this presentation. Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen to this presentation. The following are the various works and references made during this presentation and will be... Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen to this presentation. The following are the works and references used to make... Thank you for watching and listening to this presentation. The following are the references and works used to enhance our knowledge during this presentation. The following will also be submitted online for your viewing at a later time. Thank you for watching and listening to this brief presentation. The following is a compilation of the works that were used to make this presentation possible. The list will also be available separately for your consideration when submitted electronically.